In a new article for the popular information Substack, Judd Legum exposes a shocking workplace trend taking place at Red Lobster locations across the country. Employees are being forced to come to work while ill because they don't have enough sick days. A survey of Red Lobster workers found just 12% of respondents had access to paid sick leave, while a whopping 63% of those who've been sick in the last month said they worked while sick. Of those respondents, 2/3 say they had come in because they couldn't afford to skip a shift.
Judd Legum joins us now to expand on his reporting. Glad to have you back on Rising, Judd.
Thanks for having me.
And so, Judd, is this how COVID specific is this reporting and this study, and how much is it looking at just sickness in the workplace more generally?
Yeah, there were two things that went on. We did a bunch of interviews with Red Lobster employees, obviously talking about the current situation, but the research we got, the data, actually spans both before COVID and throughout the whole COVID process over the last couple of years. So sick leave at Red Lobster and in the service industry in general was not great before COVID, and it continues to be quite bad.
Yeah, has Red Lobster responded to this? Have you heard anything from them of what their excuse is as to why they're exposing people potentially to illness by having their workers continue to work while sick?
Yeah, Red Lobster did get back to us in response to this report. They said that it was the industry standard. That's partially true. There are other restaurants that don't provide paid sick leave, but Red Lobster's former parent company, Darden, which currently owns Olive Garden and a number of other chains, did at the beginning of the pandemic begin to offer paid sick leave to all its employees. So it's something that other large chain restaurants have done. And then Red Lobster also said that it was their policy that Red Lobster employees should not report to work sick, and then seemingly putting onus on them, said that if they are found to be working sick, they will be fired. So that was their response.
And so if they were not supposed to be working sick, would they be then given paid sick leave, or they would just be not fired for not coming in that day?
Yeah, they would just be not fired. There is really no paid sick leave at Red Lobster. The 12% that show up in this survey are the fact that in about 11 states, now up to 14, there is by law, you have to provide sick leave. The fact that it's only 12%, and this shows up in the survey data and in our own reporting, suggests that even in places where Red Lobster is required to provide paid leave by law, employees of Red Lobster have difficulty accessing paid leave, because otherwise it would be at least somewhat higher than 12%.
OSHA, the Biden OSHA vaccine mandate has interesting implications here, because the undiscussed part of it is the testing aspect. And so if it requires testing, which means that, and it also says you're not allowed to come to work if you test positive. So how would that intersect with Red Lobster and other companies who don't give sick leave?
Well, this has been a problem with federal policy from the beginning of the pandemic, because you did have in that initial legislation that was passed right after the pandemic hit a requirement that employers provide paid sick leave. And it was initially all employers, and then there was a carve out for large employers with 500 and more employees. And so I guess the idea was, well, they would do the right thing and they can afford to do it themselves because the bill provided subsidies for smaller employers to offer paid sick leave. But the reality is many employers just took that opportunity for business as usual. And when you look at this data that would form the basis for this report, and you look at the service sector, they polled 90,000 service workers. They found that about 50% had access to paid sick leave before the pandemic, and right now, 50% have access to paid sick leave. So if you're working at a large companies really have not extended paid sick leave. So if you do have the vaccine mandate and you aren't allowed to go into work, you will not be paid.
Yeah, and I used to be a server myself, and one of the problems in certain parts of the country is that servers are paid, their salary itself, the wage is extremely low. something like $3 or $4, and then and then you have tips on top of that. And so even if you were to get paid sick leave, I mean, what would it be? So a lot of servers, including myself back when I was doing it, I did work when I didn't feel well. I didn't have a choice. I had to pay rent. A lot of servers don't work 40 hours a week. They're in school. They have other things that they've got going on. And so they're only working part-time as it is, and, 20, 30 hours a week. And they need all of the money they can get from the tips. And especially since the pandemic hit and fewer people are coming in to eat, they're already hurting when it comes to tip money. So, this sort of policy of not giving, it seems to me like it would make more sense if they said, okay, if you go to a doctor or a lab and you test positive for COVID or the flu or any other diagnosable spreadable illness, it should be mandatory in the government that they give you a living wage during the days that you're sick for a set period of time. And they can even say, with COVID, it's this many days. For flu, it's this many days. For strep throat, it's this many days. Like, you just don't want to be spreading this stuff around. Yeah, and that's what they did for small employers, and then they provided subsidies on top of that. The problem is for so many employees who work for these large companies, they were carved out of it. And in addition to this issue of them not being able to afford the shift, I think we talked to a bunch of Red Lobster workers, or to miss a shift. We talked to a bunch of Red Lobster workers who said that they were required by their managers, if they were to miss a shift, even if they were willing not to get paid, that it was their responsibility to find someone else to fill that shift. That's all. And if they couldn't do that, they were expected to come in. Yeah, that's always been the case, unfortunately, in the service industry, is that if you go on vacation or if you're sick, you got to find your own replacement, which is crazy. It's like, what is the manager paid for? Like, what's going on here? Yes, yeah, really. I've always been frustrated by that. I like it if it's a worker-run company, then fine, then that's great. That's great to have that kind of worker camaraderie. But if it's just a for-profit company and the manager's getting paid to manage, it's like, hey, if I'm not coming in, it's your job to find somebody to come in. Anyway, Judd, thank you so much for joining us. Really great reporting. Yeah. Thanks a lot. And we'll have more Rising right after this.